Do you ever fantasize about living in the Middle Ages? Gallant knights, majestic castles, grand feasts. It all sounds so romantic, right? Well, let me burst that bubble for you. The truth is, you with your modern sensibilities and pampered immune system wouldn't survive a single day. And I'm going to show you exactly why. Forget everything you've seen in movies. The reality was a brutal, filthy, and short existence that makes our worst days look like a 5-star vacation. So, buckle up as we take a trip back in time to see just how tough life really was. Let's start with the most basic necessity: food. You might picture massive feasts with roasted turkeys and overflowing goblets. The reality for 90% of the population: a monotonous, unappetizing, and frankly dangerous diet. Your daily meal would likely be pottage, a watery vegetable stew that simmered over the fire for days. Think of it as a perpetual soup, with new ingredients constantly thrown in, along with a healthy serving of dirt, insects, and whatever else happened to fall in. And bread? It wasn't your soft, fluffy sourdough. It was a dense, dark brick made from rye or barley, often containing grit and stone chips from the grinding process. This wasn't just unpleasant. It slowly destroyed people's teeth, leading to a lifetime of dental agony. Worse still, rye bread could be contaminated with a fungus called ergot. This nasty stuff caused a condition known as St. Anthony's fire, which led to horrifying symptoms like burning sensations, gangrene, and vivid hallucinations. Some historians even believe ergot poisoning was a major factor behind the mass hysteria of the witch trials. If you were lucky enough to get meat, it was a rare luxury. And since there was no refrigeration, it was often on the verge of spoiling. That's why spices like cloves and pepper were so valuable, not just for flavor, but to mask the taste of rot. As for drinking water, you'd be wise to avoid it. Rivers and wells were contaminated with human and animal waste, making them a breeding ground for deadly diseases. So what did everyone drink? Ale. Weak, watery ale, but ale nonetheless. Everyone, including children, drank it from morning till night, consuming up to 8 pints a day just to stay hydrated. Now let's talk about where all that food and ale ended up. Brace yourself, because medieval hygiene was non-existent. Forget flushing toilets and pristine bathrooms. Your toilet was a chamber pot, and when it was full, you'd simply open a window, shout, "Garde à l'eau," which means, "Watch out for the water," and dump the contents onto the street below. If you lived in a castle, you might have a guard robe, which was little more than a stone seat with a hole that dropped waist down the castle walls into the moat. It was a smelly, drafty affair, especially in winter. Cities were a labyrinth of open sewers. The streets were rivers of filth, filled with garbage, animal droppings, and human waste. There were very few public latrines. A specialized and highly unpleasant job was that of the gong farmer, who was hired to clean out cesspits at night. Despite being well paid for the time, they were social outcasts because of the stench that clung to them. And what about toilet paper? Forget it. You'd use whatever was on hand: leaves, moss, hay, or if you were wealthy, scraps of wool or linen. Cities stank so badly that the River Thames in London was famously described as a monster of stink. Just imagine that smell hitting you on a hot summer day. So, how would you spend your day? If you weren't a noble, you were a peasant, and your life was one of relentless, back-breaking labor. You'd work from sunrise to sunset in the fields, using primitive tools to plow, sow, and harvest. It's estimated that the average peasant burned around 4,000 calories a day just to survive. Other jobs were just as grueling. Blacksmiths risked severe burns and inhaled toxic fumes daily. Tanners, who turned animal hides into leather, worked with a nauseating mix of animal brains, dung, and urine. Childhood as we know it didn't exist. By age 7, children were often sent away as apprentices, working for up to 14 years in exchange for training. Some jobs were downright desperate. You could be a torch boy, holding a burning torch for hours in a smoky hall, or even a collector of dog poop, which was used in the tanning process. For all this hard work, the pay was abysmal. Maybe 1 or 2 pennies a day, barely enough to feed yourself. There was no social safety net, no weekends off, no concept of retirement. You worked until you dropped. If the work didn't kill you, disease probably would. Life expectancy was brutal, hovering around 30 to 40 years. And that, guess, if you survived childhood. Around 30% of children died before reaching the age of 5. Epidemics were common and devastating. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, wiped out nearly half the population. It was an apocalyptic event that left entire villages empty. And medical care, it would terrify you. Medieval medicine was based on the ancient theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was seen as an imbalance of these humors. The solution? Barbaric treatments like bloodletting, where a barber surgeon would cut you open to drain the excess blood. Leeches were a common sight, as was the use of mercury, a toxic heavy metal, as a cure for everything from skin diseases to syphilis. Dental problems were rampant, and the only solution for a toothache was extraction, done without anesthetic and with terrifyingly crude tools. Often, the cure was far worse and more deadly than the disease itself. Let's say you managed to avoid starvation and disease. You still had to contend with the justice system, which was anything but just. Laws were arbitrary and varied from one village to the next. Punishments were swift, brutal, and often a public spectacle. Steal a loaf of bread? You might have your hand cut off. Over 200 different crimes carried the death penalty. If you were accused of a crime, you might face a trial by ordeal. This meant holding a red-hot iron bar or being thrown into a river. If your hand healed quickly or if you sank, you were declared innocent. If you floated, you were guilty and executed. Torture was an accepted part of the legal process. Devices like the rack, which stretched a person's body until their joints dislocated, or the thumbscrews were used to extract confessions. And prisons weren't for rehabilitation. They were filthy holding cells where you were left to starve unless your family brought you food. For lesser crimes, public humiliation was the punishment of choice. You could be locked in the stocks 4 days, where townspeople would pelt you with rotten food and waste. For the rich and powerful, it was a different story. Nobles could often buy their freedom or demand a trial by combat. For a commoner, there was little hope of a fair trial. And what about those glorious knights in shining armor? Well, war was a constant feature of medieval life. The 100 Years' War, for example, actually lasted 116 years. But a full suit of plate armor cost as much as a luxury sports car today. Only the wealthiest lords could afford it. Most soldiers went into battle wearing little more than padded cloth jackets and a metal helmet. Their weapons were often simple: spears, axes, or even modified farm tools. Battles were scenes of unimaginable carnage. At the Battle of Towton in 1461, an estimated 28,000 men were killed in a single day. That's more than 1% of England's entire male population at the time. And if a weapon didn't kill you outright, infection probably would. A simple cut from a dirty blade, was often a death sentence. Armies lived off the land, which meant they pillaged and burned villages, causing widespread famine and destruction for civilians caught in their path. During long sieges, conditions inside castle walls became horrific, with starvation and disease leading to desperation, and in some recorded cases, even cannibalism. Life wasn't just dangerous, it was foul. Towns and cities were an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the stench of rotting garbage, animal waste, blood from butcher shops, and the chemical fumes from tanneries. Personal hygiene was an afterthought. People might bathe a few times a year, if that. Everyone from peasants to kings was infested with lice and fleas. Your wardrobe would consist of 2 or 3 outfits made of rough, itchy wool, which were rarely, if ever, washed. Families, parents, children, and sometimes even livestock, all lived, ate, and slept together in a single, dark, smoky room. So what did people do for fun? Entertainment was as brutal as everything else. Public executions were major social events. Animal cruelty, like bear baiting, was a popular pastime. Society was locked in a rigid feudal system. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. There was almost no social mobility. Life was governed by superstition. People believed in witches, demons, and evil spirits. An eclipse wasn't a scientific wonder. It was a terrifying omen of disaster. So the next time you watch a movie about knights and princesses, remember the reality. The Middle Ages were a time of constant hunger, rampant disease, backbreaking labor, cruel justice, and unimaginable filth. The romantic image we have is a fantasy. The truth is a brutal world where survival itself was a daily struggle. We are incredibly fortunate to live with the comforts we now take for granted, from clean water and modern medicine to something as simple as toilet paper. Thanks for joining me on this rather grim journey back in time. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what modern convenience you think you'd miss the most. See you next time